Welcome back to centralcoastradio.com, where we are talking about Oz Comic Con, all of the things that we loved at this year's convention here in Melbourne, and now we're going to be taking a bit of a look at what we learnt during the Q&As as this year's Comic Con. So, Lee, what were the things that you learnt during this year's Q&As at Comic Con?
Yeah, well, I already started talking about this, and I'll just continue with, obviously, Clive Standen and the Lucy Martin Q&As. Just how professional the actors really are, how dedicated they are to their roles. I think it was just interesting to know how fascinated Clive is in relation to history, and just knowing the role back to front before, I guess, he even started the role. I think it was amazing to hear him talk about advice he'd given when being filmed. If he thought that something didn't fit a character, if the way it was written was not quite what he thought his character would do, he felt confident in being able to say so. And I think something that stood out, he said that there was a scene where he felt that he would need to hold a person's head up and cut it off, behead them, but look in their eyes and be strong and confident that he is a Viking and that's the way it's done, and historically that's the way it's done. And so that scene ended up happening that way. And I think from Lucy, she spoke very much about a scene that she had a lot of creative license with, and basically choreographed a dance and a whole scene that fit in with her character that on set they weren't sure was going to actually work out, but she was so confident in herself because of her dance background that it all came together beautifully and it happened, and it's in the seasons.
Yeah, definitely. I had a few things that I learnt from the Q&As. Like you, Clive Standen, I love some of the stuff he talked about. I love that he talked about the fact that Travis Fimmel is such a down-to-earth country Victoria boy. He talked about a story about how when they were first starting out on the show that the cast, the crew had to carry all these heavy boxes up a mountain for a scene, and it was going to take them 2 or 3 journeys because of the boxes. And Travis Fimmel turned around to the cast and said, "Hey guys, why don't we help him so that we can do it in one?" And Clive Standen said, of course, they could have turned around and said, the Actors Union won't let us, but they all did it. Again, like you said, I love the fact that he also told the story that Gustav Skarsgård, who plays Floki in the show, at one point said that they needed to change a scene because it was not the way that Vikings would do something. And the director said, no, we're doing it my way. And he said, well, no, because it's disrespectful to my heritage, because Gustav is Scandinavian. And I remember, like, when he said that, I thought, I like that because I've got Scandinavian heritage as well. And it's like, I like the fact that there was someone there on set who went, well, you know what? It's kind of disrespectful to our people if you don't do it the way that it was supposed to be. So I really, really liked that they talked about that. The story that made me laugh, though, about Clive was in the very early days of the show, he had to do a scene where he had to stand up to Travis Fimmel. And he said that whenever he started that scene, he would kind of like walk up and do a facial expression
like
and a noise.
Sniff, like a inhaling sniff.
To kind of look strong. And he said there was a Scandinavian director, and the Scandinavian director came over and said, what are you doing? Like, why do you need to do that? Like, you're Clive Standen, you're Rollo, look how big you are. You don't have to do a noise to do that. And he said he actually didn't realize that he was making that noise at the start of the scene. So he said he did it like the 6th or 7th time, and he didn't do that noise and didn't do the sniff. And he said the director just gave him a little thumbs up. And he said that's great advice for people out there, that sometimes when you're playing a role, you feel like you have to bring these little things in. But as the director pointed out to him, he was this great big massive Viking who, as he said, could have killed anybody in the room. There was no need for him to do that because his physicality was enough to already make him look that big. So I really liked that. I love that he was so open with some of the stuff that he talked about and gave us an insight to what it was like working on Vikings. Were there any other things that you learnt from listening to the people talk?
Yeah, I think Emily Swallow, she gave a lot of information about what it's like to film Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett. And she talked about the different screens. Of course, you've got your green screen and blue screen. And she spoke about a different screen where it's pretty much circular. And because a lot of the imagery they've got to imagine is there, they had these screens where they could actually see what was happening so that they could react to that image. Even though their imaginations are amazing and they can picture things in their head, it is very difficult, as you can imagine, knowing exactly where to stand or what to react to. And so she was just explaining that these screens were really, really helpful to them. And I don't think I'd really heard of that circular screen before. But yeah, I was very fascinated with that. She definitely spoke a lot about her costume and how she doesn't like to look down, which when she's in her costume, which can create tripping hazards, but she just obviously looks around before she has to do a scene and tries to imagine how far she'll have to walk or where she'll have to stop, so that when she's in her suit, she looks confident, she's walking with strength, and hoping not to trip over. But she said to look down would actually, make her character do something that she wouldn't think her character would do.
Yep.
So just that commitment again to the character of how they think the character would react or would respond or would be portrayed, and putting that character above their own needs, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had another short one. I really liked John Noble talking about when he first started on the Lord of the Rings franchise, and Viggo Mortensen, he said, as a surprising little story, his trailer was in the middle of this paddock, and he said it was a really wet and cold day. His trailer was away from the people who were starring, like, in the film. And he said Viggo Mortensen, whose caravan was with the stars, walked all the way across this wet, soggy paddock and knocked on John Noble's caravan door, and when he answered it, said, "I just wanted to welcome you to the Lord of the Rings family." And he said he didn't have to do that. Like, that was not something he had to do. The other story that really surprised me was Katie Lotz talking about when she first auditioned for her role in Legends of Tomorrow in the DC universe. And she said after her first audition, they said to her, we don't need you. You're not... What was the term that she used? You're not CW enough.
Yeah.
So she actually thought that she had missed out on the role and that she wasn't going to get it. And then 3 days later, she got a surprising phone call saying, "Could you please come in and do a chemistry test," which is when they get an actress or an actor to read together to see if there's chemistry between the two, with Stephen Amell. And she said, "I thought you said I wasn't CW enough for the role." And they said, "Oh, well, just come in. We want you to do it." And she ended up with it. So she said all she can think of was that the network didn't want her, but the producers did. So, yeah, that was pretty interesting. But also hearing her and Juliana Harkavy talking about how they feel a little bit let down that their shows ended without proper finales. And they both wish that would change. I loved that Juliana said that she really wishes that they'd done a Birds of Prey series, which is something that I've been wanting for a long, long time. So, yeah, that was really interesting as well, I thought.
Yeah, and I think we got some insight into their personal lives too here. Just saw how Katie and Juliana are pretty much best friends, actually, and them and their husbands hang out together. And, yeah, that was just, you know, a different look at them, I guess, and it was so nice of them to share some of their personal story, because that's not expected. People don't have to share those things, but yeah, it was just good to hear of the times that they've hung out together, offset and as friends, and even some of their interests. Katie was saying that you know,
she loves making
likes
flowers,
making crafts, paper flowers and things like that. But she likes, you know, designing, like interior designing. There was so much to her, that like such a variety of things that she's interested in. And you know, Juliana shared a little bit about her husband and that he's a life coach, I think she said, and gave marriage advice to the audience as well, and had been giving Katie some marriage advice because she'd just recently been married. And so all these personal things came out that they shared with the audience there. But yeah, I just thought that was lovely because we love to hear about their acting, but they really shared themselves as well.
Yeah, and of course the other panel that we went to was a kind of an all-star anime panel with some of the leading voice actors and actresses in the world. Aaron Dismuke was there, Ryan Colt Levy, Abby Trott, and Sarah Windeneft, and they were talking about how they got into voice acting, because it was interesting. None of the four of them had ever spent time as a child thinking, I want to be a voice actor. They'd all kind of got into it for like in different ways. I think it was Aaron who talked about the fact that he got into it because a family relative,
cousin, I think,
worked in the industry, and they were trying to find somebody who could do the voice of a prepubescent teen. And they went, oh, do we know anyone that is one? And they put his name forward, and he went and did it and has fallen in love with doing it. But they all voiced such iconic characters. It was really interesting to hear them talk about how they play those characters and the fandom that comes with that. Like, especially the girls, they're playing two roles that are absolutely iconic in the world of anime. So it was interesting hearing how they approached that. The other great story that I thought, and such an amazing story, was Ryan Colt Levy talking about playing Chainsaw Man and the fact that he used to be in a band and he always thought being a musician was going to be his job. And then one day the band just said, you know what, this is not really working. And he's had to look at his life and go, well, what do I want to do? And he said, I want to do acting. But the funny bit was about his role in Chainsaw Man was that he was actually a fan of the anime, and he went to the trailer launch of the show and thought that they'd already cast somebody to play the part. And then he got asked to audition for it and got the role. And he said never in a million years did he think that he was ever going to do that. But I love the stories that that both Abby and Sarah shared, like with their careers. They've both got amazing careers, and it was just awesome to hear them talking about that as well.
Yeah, and I think really, again, strongly coming through is their commitment and work ethic as well, and how much effort they put into voice acting. You know, while they've got a natural talent, they really work hard at different sounds, different voices, and, you know, really cool that we got a glimpse of those voices actually in person on stage, and to see them in person doing a little snippet without the actual anime character on the screen. It's just something special to see them doing it in person.
I love how quickly they can do the voice as well. Like,
It just comes so naturally.
like, it was really interesting because the night before, I had actually been watching an interview with Seth MacFarlane, who of course does a lot of the voices, Family Guy.
Yep.
And they asked him the question when he's doing a scene in Family Guy and he's voicing more than one character, does he do it in different takes? And he said no. Like, if he's doing two characters and they're having a discussion, he'll actually switch between the two voices.
Yep.
And then he did it live on the show that he was on to show just how easy he could do it. And it was the same with these. Someone would say to them from the audience, oh, could you do part of your favorite character? And I remember there was one point where Sarah was just like talking in a normal voice, and the next minute she was doing her voice of her character. It was like, wow.
I
like,
don't think it sound like that.
No. But it was like so awesome how quickly she could go into the character, like without. And we saw that earlier this year as well when we saw someone who voiced Ash in Pokemon, and they did the same thing. They were able to just go into the voice even though they hadn't done it for a while. So
yeah, and they speak about mistakes they've made, like while recording, and how much fun that would be, I suppose, to play those bloopers if they could. But very down to earth, and lots of good advice in the Q&A section for the audience to ask them. I suppose, especially those wanting to go into voice acting. They were just really professional and respectful of people's questions and gave them great advice.
Definitely. Well, that is our wrap up of Oz Comic Con 2023. Look out for Oz Comic Con coming to a city near you, because it is moving around Australia for the rest of the year. But that was our highlights and lowlights of Oz Comic Con. We want to thank them for giving us permission to go along and cover such an awesome convention as well. So thank you so much for that. And we'll be back in just a moment on centralcoastradio.com.